The funny thing about this episode is that I am fully convinced it wouldn't have been so disliked if the child abuse was worse. The other funny thing is that I actually kinda liked it. Yes, I know Grandma's Hands has a controversial beginning, and a controversial middle, and probably a controversial end while it's at it. And I don't really disagree with that. But you don't need me to tell you this episode was controversial. If you've heard of this episode, you probably know it. If you've heard of this show, you probably know it. And the crazy thing is, it turns out this wouldn't even be in the top 3 most controversial episodes of the season. But I've already talked about 2 of the others, and I actually desperately don't want to talk about the third, so let's move on. This is a weird case of separating the good and the bad, and understanding exactly why the bad is bad. And once I take all that into consideration, I just like it more than I don't. And I'm not trying to convince you this episode's secretly a masterpiece or something, just trying to get my thoughts out there. Because I do genuinely believe that the writers made a massive mistake when they were making this, as I will get into as we go on. And the bad starts long before this episode does, as you can't really discuss this episode without looking at the relationship between Suga Mama and Oscar and how dysfunctional it is. Like, damn, sometimes it feels like she hates the guy. It's odd, especially compared to his pampered brother, Bobby. I made a whole video about why Oscar's portrayal works, but even with that, the enmity between himself and his mom often feels excessive. However, my feelings were tempered by 2 things. 1, the show is cartoony as hell. When Penny became a basketballer, she played an octopus and became the best basketballer in the galaxy. LaCienega's family problems involve her being sent flying on a firework. Penny knows a demon that almost traps her in college forever. I do not take this show that seriously, which can make it a bit weird when it wants me to, but that's a whole different matter. My point is, this show is exaggerated as hell. Suga Mama's behavior is hard to call anything besides abusive, but when she turns into it mid-conversation to scare her son, all I can do is laugh. It's the same reason most people don't think Homer's a bad dad, even though him strangling Bart is a running joke. The second thing that tempered my feelings was Oscar and how good he was at messing things up. So usually when he gets wrecked by life, I just see it as karma. But even with all that, the sheer vitriol between the 2 characters seemed off. And then we got to the second episode of season 2. And personally, it felt weird going from the end of episode 1 to this. Penny starts misbehaving, so her parents decide to lock her outside. An intense, excessive reaction? Yes. And oddly unnecessary. They could have just sent her directly to Suga Mama's house instead of making it look like they were really gonna let their daughter sleep outside. I'm still wondering if that was always the plan, or if Oscar really did need to sneak out to get his daughter a roof to sleep under. I mean, that's kind of the obvious solution to this problem, right? In fact, it actually feels like something that should come naturally, that no, Penny's parents weren't actually gonna make her sleep outside. They were always planning on sending her to Suga Mama's. They just wanted to scare her a bit. And you can say that it's not really a great alternative, but it's better than me sitting here thinking, so if Oscar didn't go out of his way to do what he did, would Penny have just slept in the garden? Especially with the trip to New York, that definitely feels premeditated and calculated. This episode works just as well if they just send her to Suga Mama's directly, because the tone of the whole locking her out action heavily colors everything else in the episode. It did not get that much better when we actually saw Oscar's childhood bed, and Suga Mama gave Penny's breakfast to Bobby. At that point, even the show's tone wasn't helping it. But as the episode went on, I realized something. Bobby lives with his mom. I mean, I knew he did, but this is when it really sunk in for me. And that realization is what made me begin liking the episode. Strip away the extreme cartoony child abuse and the oddly realistic child abuse, and this episode actually has a through line I like. Because Bobby is not an adult. He's old, but he ain't grown. Even when Suga Mama is injured, at no point do either Suga Mama, Penny, Dr. Payne, or Bobby himself think he'll be any help. He is severely dependent on his mother, as opposed to Oscar, who has his problems, but also has his own house, family, and what I'm sure some would call a job that I assume makes some money. It's tangled up in all sorts of things that would be getting CPS, the IRS, and the FBI called on you, but it's there. In an episode about getting Penny to become more responsible, Bobby being lazy and unhelpful creates a useful contrast as the cuddled son's life has really not gone anywhere. And then Suga Mama fell down a flight of steps and the episode became even better. Like, I found Penny's whole revenge act funny.
I'm gonna take good care of you, the same way you took care of me and my daddy.
She included her father in her threat. That's adorable. But then the episode made it clear that this is where it was willing to draw the line on what it wants to be cartoony and what it wants to be serious. And Suga Mama's injuries are serious. And while Penny didn't like what was happening to her, we weren't about to transfer from child abuse to elder abuse. And that's where the through line coalesced for me. Because, all the bad aside, living with Suga Mama did have the intended effect. It made her more responsible. On an episodic show like this, I question if it would have had any impact because Penny is as responsible and irresponsible as the individual episodes need her to be. But, let's not dwell on that. Penny's dad may have grown up in a terrible situation, but he did grow up. But despite all that, I'm not gonna claim this completely absolves the episode for the other things it does. And my solution to those problems would probably sound odd. I really think this episode would be a lot more liked if we just toned down the child abuse. Or toned it up to the point where we don't take it seriously. What a weird thing for me to say. A lot, and I mean a lot of people have criticized the show for the whole locking Penny outside thing. And I think it's for the same reason we hate Umbridge more than Voldemort. We recognize one as something real with very real consequences. Like I said, the show is really cartoony, and sometimes we're not supposed to take the things that happen in it seriously. This is the show that started its autism episode with a child nearly flying a plane out of a museum and ends with him joining the X-Men. More people complain about the realistic instances of bad behavior in this show than anything else. The use of Penny as an impromptu babysitter gets more of a reaction and incites more criticism than the literal crime that is Oscar's amusement park, because one is something we can actually expect to see in the real world and the other has a drop into the underworld. If Oscar and Trudy reacted to Penny coming home late by loading her into a cannon and shooting her at Suga Mama's house, I think this episode would be considered unremarkable. In fact, I think 10 times more people know about the beginning of this episode than the actual plot. Suga Mama herself spends the whole episode playing jump rope with the line between absurd and realistic. But it's all tainted by the initial action that simply falls too far into the realm of the realistic. And if the episode hadn't inadvertently gotten its audience to think of the many bad things that could happen to a teenage girl locked outside her house for a whole night, I don't think anyone would have taken the rest of the episode so seriously as to be so heavily critical of it. I want to say I like this episode. In fact, I will say I like this episode, but it is affected by earlier decisions that make the rest of it kind of hard to stomach. But those are my thoughts. What are yours? Tell me down in the comments, and while you're at it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Thank you, and good day.